Throw him out, or I'm leaving, the man in the tailored coat said, his voice cutting through the low hum of the diner like a blade. And for a second, every fork paused midair, every coffee cup hovered just short of a sip. But Ava didn't look at the man, didn't look at the manager rushing over with a tight smile. She just kept her eyes on the old man by the window, the one no one ever sat near, the one who always chose the same cracked vinyl booth beneath the flickering neon sign that buzzed like it was tired of staying alive. Outside, rain slid down the glass in thin silver lines, turning the parking lot into a mirror of smeared headlights. And inside, the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee clung to the air like something that refused to leave. And still, Ava moved quietly, like she had practiced being invisible her whole life. Her tray balanced steady in one hand as she stepped past the complaint, past the tension, past the eyes that followed her not with kindness, but with judgment. The old man didn't look up right away, his hands resting on the table, thin and still, like they had forgotten what they were meant to hold. His coat worn at the edges but clean, always clean, and that was the part that never made sense to her, because everything about him said he had nothing. But the way he folded his napkin, the way he sat straight even when no one was watching, said something else entirely. Ava set the plate down without a word. Eggs she paid for herself, toast she slipped from the kitchen when no one counted, and a cup of coffee filled just right. Not too much, not too little, the way he seemed to prefer. And when he finally lifted his eyes, there was something there, not surprise, not even gratitude, just a quiet recognition, like he had been expecting her, like in a room full of people who pretended not to see him. She was the only one who ever did. Behind her, she could feel the tension tightening, hear the low murmur of customers whispering, the sharp heels of Linda crossing the tile faster now. And she knew what was coming before it happened, the warning, the look, the reminder that kindness didn't pay the bills, that this place ran on orders and tips and appearances, not on moments no one could measure. But Ava didn't rush, didn't explain, didn't apologize. She just reached into her apron, pulled out a folded paper napkin, and placed it beside the plate with the same careful motion she used every night, smoothing it once with her fingertips as if that small act mattered, as if dignity could be given in inches. The old man's hand moved then, slow but certain, resting lightly over the edge of the plate. And for the briefest second, the noise of the diner faded, the clatter, the complaints, the hum of the neon, all of it slipping into the background until there was only that booth, that quiet exchange, that unspoken understanding that needed no words. And somewhere beyond the rain-streaked glass, unseen by anyone inside, a black sedan idled at the far end of the parking lot, its engine low and steady, headlights dimmed, as if it had been watching this exact moment all along. The door chimed as another customer stepped in, shaking rain from his coat, but the eyes around the room were still drifting back to that booth, still circling the quiet exchange they could not quite understand. And Ava felt it settle on her shoulders like a weight she had learned to carry without showing it. Linda stopped beside her, arms crossed tight, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the diner, saying that this could not keep happening, that customers were starting to notice, that there were rules for a reason. And Ava nodded once, not in agreement but in acknowledgement, because arguing would only make it louder, would only turn something small and human into something public and cold. She turned back toward the counter, refilling mugs, wiping surfaces already clean, moving through her shift with the same quiet precision that kept her from being replaced, but her eyes kept drifting back to the window, to the way the old man ate slowly, carefully, like each bite mattered more than the last, like he was not just filling hunger but remembering something he could not quite hold on to. The rain softened outside, turning from a steady sheet into a fine mist that blurred the edges of everything, and the neon sign flickered again, casting red light across the glass and onto his face. And for a moment, just a moment, he did not look tired or lost or forgotten. He looked composed, almost dignified, like a man sitting in a place he chose, not one he had been pushed into. When he finished, he folded the napkin with care, aligning the edges as if it were something important, something worth doing right even if no one would ever see it. And then he reached into his coat, not hurried, not uncertain, just deliberate, and placed something on the table beneath the cup. Ava noticed it from across the room. a small rectangle catching the dim light, and her steps slowed without meaning to as she made her way back, her fingers brushing the edge of the booth as she cleared the plate. The old man stood then, straighter than she expected, his movements steady despite the tremor in his hands. And for a second he looked at her, really looked, his eyes holding hers with a quiet intensity that made the noise of the diner fall away again. And he spoke, his voice low but clear, saying thank you in a way that sounded less like gratitude and more like recognition, like he was acknowledging something she had not said out loud. Ava gave a small nod, the kind that did not invite attention, and watched as he turned and walked toward the door, each step measured, each movement controlled. And when the bell chimed again and the cold air slipped in around him, he did not look back. The booth felt different without him, emptier in a way that had nothing to do with space, and Ava reached for the cup, lifting it carefully, her eyes catching the object he had left behind. And when she picked it up, her breath slowed just a fraction, because it was not what she expected, not loose change or a crumpled bill, but a card, thick and clean, with no name on the front, only a faint imprint that shimmered when it caught the light. She turned it slightly, her thumb brushing the edge, and for a moment she hesitated, aware of Linda watching from the counter, aware of the room returning to its usual rhythm, the clatter and chatter filling the space again as if nothing had happened. But something had. She could feel it in the quiet way the air had shifted, in the way that black sedan still lingered beyond the fogged glass, its engine steady, its presence patient, like it was waiting for something to finish or finally begin. The card felt heavier than it should have, like it carried something more than paper, and Ava turned it once between her fingers before slipping it into the pocket of her apron, not because she understood it, but because something about leaving it behind felt wrong, like ignoring a sentence that had not finished speaking. The diner moved on around her, orders called out, plates sliding across the counter, the steady rhythm of a place that did not pause for anyone, and yet she found herself working just a little slower, her attention drifting back to the empty booth, to the faint outline of where his hands had rested, to the coffee cup still warm as if he had just stepped away for a moment instead of disappearing into the gray morning. Linda watched her for a while, then finally said her name in that tone that meant this was the last time she would say it gently, reminding her again that kindness did not keep the lights on, that customers paid for comfort, not reminders of things they chose not to see. And Ava nodded again. The same quiet acceptance, even as something inside her resisted the idea that what she had done needed to be corrected. Outside, the mist lifted just enough to reveal the parking lot more clearly, and the black sedan was still there, not idling now but parked, its windows dark, its presence deliberate, and for a moment Ava wondered if it belonged to someone inside, someone who had not yet come in, but no one moved toward it, no one claimed it, and the longer it stayed, the less it felt like coincidence. She finished her shift with the same steady pace, clocked out without conversation, and stepped outside into the cool air that carried the scent of rain and asphalt, pulling her jacket tighter around her as she glanced once more toward the spot where the sedan had been. But it was gone now, leaving nothing behind but the faint impression of tire tracks that would fade before noon. The day passed the way most days did, quietly, without announcement, until evening settled in and the diner lights flickered back to life, drawing in the usual mix of tired faces and routine conversations. And Ava returned, not because she had to, but because it was what she did, slipping back into her role as if nothing had shifted, as if the morning had not left a question hanging in the air. She reached into her apron again, feeling the edge of the card, and this time she pulled it out, turning it under the warm overhead lights, her thumb tracing the faint imprint again. And as she tilted it just right, letters revealed themselves in the reflection, subtle but precise, and beneath them, a number, not printed loudly but etched in a way that suggested it was meant to be found only by someone who looked closely. Ava stared at it for a moment, her breath slowing, her mind turning over the possibilities without settling on any of them, because whatever this was, it did not belong to the world. She knew. Not to late tips and double shifts and quiet acts that disappeared as soon as they were done. Behind her, the bell above the door chimed again. But this time it did not sound like a single arrival. It echoed, once, twice, then again, as if the air itself had changed. And when Ava looked up, The light from outside shifted across the floor in long, dark lines, stretching toward the counter like something approaching, something that had finally decided to step inside. The bell above the door did not stop ringing right away. It echoed in short, staggered chimes as if one arrival had triggered another, and the conversations inside the diner began to thin out, voices lowering without anyone quite realizing why. Because something about the way the light shifted through the doorway felt different, heavier, like the room itself was preparing for something it could not yet see. Ava stood still behind the counter, the card still in her hand, her thumb pressing lightly against its edge as she watched the entrance, her breath slowing in quiet instinct rather than fear, while Linda straightened her posture beside the register, smoothing her hair and adjusting her tone before anyone even spoke, as if she sensed that whoever was coming in would not be the kind of customer she could dismiss with a tight smile. The first man stepped through the door without hesitation, tall, composed, dressed in a dark suit that seemed untouched by the damp air outside, his shoes silent against the tile, his eyes scanning the room not with curiosity, but with purpose. And behind him came another, then another, each one moving with the same measured control, not rushed, not uncertain, just precise. Like they had done this before, like they knew exactly where they were meant to be. The diner fell quieter with each step they took, forks set down, coffee cups forgotten midair. Even the hum of the neon sign seemed to fade beneath the weight of their presence, and Ava felt it then, the subtle shift in attention, the way their focus narrowed not on the room, not on the customers, but on something specific, something that had already happened before they ever walked through that door. One of the men stopped a few feet from the counter, his gaze settling on Ava with a calm intensity that made her straighten without thinking, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching just long enough to feel intentional, before he asked, his voice even and clear, if she had been the one working the morning shift, if she had served a man who sat by the window. And Ava did not answer right away, not because she did not know what to say, but because something about the question felt larger than it sounded, like it carried weight she had not yet understood. Linda stepped in quickly, her voice polite but guarded, asking if there was a problem, if something had gone wrong. But the man did not look at her, did not shift his focus even slightly, and Ava felt the card in her hand again, felt the faint imprint beneath her fingers as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. She nodded once, slow and steady, and said yes. She had served him, she had given him breakfast, and the man's expression did not change, not immediately, but there was a flicker there, something subtle, something that passed between the men behind him without words, and then another figure stepped forward. From the doorway, older, composed, his presence quieter but somehow more commanding than the others, and when he spoke, he did not ask a question. He said a name, a full name, clear and deliberate, and the room did not react right away because most of them did not recognize it. But Ava felt it land anyway, felt the way the air tightened just slightly, as if something important had just been placed into the center of the room. Outside, through the glass, headlights began to appear one after another, long dark vehicles lining the edge of the parking lot in perfect stillness, and for the first time, the diner did not feel like a place people pass through. It felt like a place something had been waiting to find. The name lingered in the air for a second longer than it should have, not loud, not dramatic, just spoken with a certainty that did not need volume, and Ava felt it settle somewhere deep without fully understanding why. While Linda blinked, her polite expression faltering just enough to reveal confusion, because to her it was just a name, another customer, another situation to manage. But to the men standing inside the diner, it was something else entirely. The older man stepped closer, his movements unhurried, his gaze steady, and when he reached the counter, he placed both hands lightly against the surface as if grounding the moment, as if confirming that this place, this exact spot, was real, and not something remembered incorrectly. And he asked Ava again, softer this time, if she had given that man food, if she had done it more than once, and Ava nodded again, slower now, aware that every eye in the room had shifted toward her, that whatever this was, it had moved past a simple question into something that carried weight she could not measure. The men behind him exchanged a glance, not surprised, not relieved, but acknowledging, as if something they had expected had finally been confirmed, and the older man exhaled quietly, a breath that seemed to release tension that had been held far longer than this moment. And then he said thank you, not as a courtesy, not as something automatic, but as something deliberate, something placed carefully into the space between them. Outside, the line of black vehicles had grown, stretching across the parking lot in a formation that did not belong to a place like this. Engines silent now, doors still closed, as if they were waiting for permission to complete something already in motion. And inside, the silence deepened, not empty, but full, like the room itself understood that something had shifted even if the people inside it did not yet know what. Linda tried to recover, her voice returning with a practiced tone, asking if there was a misunderstanding, if someone needed assistance. But again, no one answered her, and Ava felt the card still in her hand, the faint imprint pressing against her skin like a reminder, like a piece of a conversation that had not yet been spoken out loud. The older man noticed it then, his eyes dropping briefly to her hand, and something changed in his expression, not shock, not confusion, but recognition, quiet and immediate, and he asked her where she got that, and Ava hesitated, just for a second, before answering that the man had left it that morning, that he had not said anything about it, that he had just placed it on the table and walked away like he always did. The room seemed to hold its breath, even the smallest sounds fading into the background, and the older man nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something far larger than the object itself, and then he stepped back, turning slightly toward the men behind him, and gave a single, subtle motion with his hand, not dramatic, not commanding, but enough. Outside, as if responding to that gesture, the doors of the vehicles began to open one by one, a synchronized movement that sent a ripple through the reflections on the diner windows, and for the first time, Ava understood that whatever had started with a quiet plate of food and a folded napkin had not ended there. It had only just begun. The doors outside opened in a slow, deliberate rhythm, one after another, and the reflection of dark suits moved across the diner windows like shadows stretching into the room before the men themselves stepped inside, each one composed, each one silent, their presence filling the space not with noise, but with certainty, and Ava felt it then. The shift from something curious into something undeniable, something that could not be explained away as coincidence or misunderstanding. The older man near the counter did not rush, did not raise his voice. He simply watched as his team entered and positioned themselves without instruction, some near the entrance, some along the walls, all of them careful not to disrupt, not to intimidate. But their very stillness carried a weight that made the air feel tighter, more focused, as if every second now mattered more than the last. Linda stepped back slightly, her confidence thinning, her usual control slipping into something quieter, more uncertain, and Ava remained where she was, the card still resting in her palm, her fingers now wrapped around it, as if holding onto it anchored her in a moment that was beginning to feel unreal. The older man turned his attention back to her, his voice lower now, almost respectful, as he asked her one more question, not about what she had done, but why. Why she had continued to bring food to someone no one else acknowledged. Why she had not stopped when it became inconvenient, when it began to cost her something. And Ava did not answer right away, not because she did not have words, but because the truth felt too simple for the weight of the question. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, quiet. She said that he looked like he had not been seen in a long time, and that sometimes that was worse than being hungry. The room did not react loudly, but something shifted, something subtle, as if that answer had settled into places people did not expect, and the older man nodded once, slowly, as if he had been waiting for that exact response, as if it confirmed something far beyond the act itself. Outside, more figures stepped from the vehicles, not rushing, not chaotic, just present, and among them, one figure moved differently, not because of speed or posture, but because of the way the others adjusted around him, the way space seemed to open without being asked, and Ava felt it before she saw him. The same quiet recognition she had felt earlier that morning, the same stillness that had existed in that booth by the window. The door opened again, the bell chiming once, clear and singular this time, and the man stepped inside, no longer hidden by distance or reflection, his coat now dry, his posture straighter, his presence no longer overlooked, and yet his eyes, when they found Ava, were exactly the same, calm, aware, unchanged. No one spoke at first, because the difference between who he had been and who he was now did not need explanation. It revealed itself in the way the room responded, in the way the men near the door lowered their gaze slightly, in the way the older man stepped aside without hesitation, and Ava stood there, the card still in her hand, realizing that the quiet moments she thought would disappear had instead been remembered, carried forward, and now returned to her in a way she had never expected. The room did not move when he stepped forward, not in the way people usually do when someone important enters. There was no rush, no scrambling, just a quiet, collective stillness, like everyone was waiting for the moment to explain itself, and Ava felt her breath slow without meaning to, her fingers tightening slightly around the card as she watched him cross the same floor he had walked hours earlier. Only now there was no hesitation in his steps, no trace of the small, careful movements she had noticed before. He stopped at the edge of the counter, close enough now that the details aligned, the same eyes, the same hands, but everything else had shifted, his coat now pressed, his posture firm, his presence impossible to overlook, and yet when he spoke, his voice was unchanged, low, steady, carrying none of the authority that surrounded him, as if he had chosen not to use it. He said her name, not guessed, not asked, but said it clearly, and Ava blinked once, caught off guard not by the recognition but by the way it felt, like being seen again in the same quiet way she had seen him, and for a moment neither of them said anything more, the silence between them filled with something that did not need to be explained. Behind him, the older man lowered his gaze slightly, a gesture so subtle most would miss it, but it carried meaning, and the others followed without question, the shift in posture rippling through the group like a silent acknowledgement of who truly held the center of the room. Ava swallowed lightly, her voice steady when it came, asking if he was all right. The same simple question she had asked him before without expecting anything in return, and this time, a faint smile touched his expression, not wide, not performative, just real, and he answered that he was, that he had been for longer than most people believed, and that was why he had come back. Linda stood frozen near the register, her usual composure replaced with something closer to uncertainty, her eyes moving between the man, the others, and Ava, as if trying to piece together a situation that no longer followed the rules she understood. The man glanced briefly around the diner, his gaze taking in the booths, the counter, the small details that had once held him without attention, and then he looked back at Ava, his focus steady. Again, and said that there are places where people are served, and then there are places where people are seen, and he paused just long enough for the words to settle before continuing, saying that this place had been both, but only because of her. Ava felt the weight of that land gently, not overwhelming, not heavy, but undeniable, and she shifted her stance slightly, grounding herself in the familiar feel of the floor beneath her shoes, the quiet hum of the diner returning in fragments around them, as if the room was slowly remembering how to exist again. He nodded once, almost to himself, and then gestured lightly toward the card in her hand, asking if she had looked at it, and Ava hesitated for just a second before admitting that she had not fully understood it, that it did not seem like something meant for her, and his expression softened in a way that did not match the power around him, as if that answer confirmed something even more important than everything that had already been revealed. And he said quietly that it had always been meant for her, from the moment she chose to see him when no one else did. The words stayed in the air longer than anything else had that morning. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, like they had weight that did not need to be proven, and Ava felt something shift inside her, something small but real, as she looked down at the card again, turning it slowly between her fingers, the faint imprint catching the diner lights in a way that seemed different now. Less like a mystery and more like an answer she had not known she was waiting for. She hesitated for a moment, aware of the room watching, of Linda standing still, of the men in suits, holding their silence like it was part of their role, and then she spoke, asking what it meant, not with doubt, but with quiet honesty, because whatever this was, it did not belong to her world, not yet. The man did not answer right away. Instead, he reached out slightly, not to take the card, but to guide her attention, his gesture subtle, respectful, as if he understood that the meaning had to come to her in its own way. And he said that sometimes value is not printed where people expect it. Sometimes it is hidden in the way something is given, in the intention behind it. And Ava looked closer, her thumb brushing the edge again, her eyes narrowing just slightly as she tilted it under the light. And this time she saw more than before, a series of numbers, a name pressed so lightly it almost disappeared, and beneath it, a small line of text that did not belong to any ordinary card, something that hinted at ownership, at access, at something far larger than a simple gesture. Her breath slowed as she processed it. Not fully, not completely, but enough to understand that this was not accidental, that nothing about that morning had been random, and she looked back up at him, her expression steady but searching, asking why. Why her? Why this place? And for the first time, something deeper moved across his face, not authority, not control, but something closer to memory, something that carried weight in a different way. He glanced briefly toward the window booth, the same one he had sat in before, and then back at her, and he said that people often measure worth by what is visible, by titles, by money, by status, but those things only show how someone is treated when they are seen, not when they are invisible. And he paused, just long enough for the words to settle, before continuing, saying that he had needed to know which kind of world he was living in, and more importantly, which kind of people still existed in it. Ava listened without interrupting, her posture still, her attention focused, and something about his explanation did not feel like justification. It felt like truth, quiet and unforced. And around them, the diner seemed to lean into the moment, the usual sounds returning in fragments, but never fully breaking the space that had formed between them. Linda shifted slightly, her voice softer now, asking if everything was all right, if there was anything she could do. And this time, the man turned toward her briefly, his expression polite but distant, acknowledging her without engaging, before returning his attention to Ava as if that was where the conversation truly belonged. He nodded once more, a small motion that carried more certainty than anything he had said, and told her to keep the card, not as a reward, not as a transaction, but as a reminder, and Ava felt her fingers close around it again, not tightly, not protectively, but with a quiet acceptance, as if she understood now that whatever came next was not something she had asked for, but something she had already earned without realizing it. The card rested warmer in her hand now, as if it had taken on the weight of everything he had just said, and Ava did not put it away this time. She let it stay visible between her fingers, turning it slightly as the overhead lights traced across its surface, catching the faint lettering again like something that wanted to be seen only after it was understood. The man watched her without pressure, without expectation. His posture relaxed in a way that did not match the presence surrounding him. And for a moment, the distance between them felt smaller than the room itself, as if everything else had stepped back to make space for what mattered. Ava lifted her eyes again, her voice quieter now, not uncertain but thoughtful, asking what she was supposed to do with it, not because she needed instructions, but because she understood that, whatever this was, it came with meaning beyond the object itself. And he nodded slightly, as if he had been waiting for that question more than any other. He told her that most people would see it as an opportunity, a way out, a step into something larger, and while that might be true, it was not the reason it had been given, and Ava listened carefully, the words settling into place without needing to be repeated, as he continued, saying that what mattered was not where it could take her, but what it had already proven, that she had made a choice without knowing who he was, without expecting anything in return, and that kind of choice could not be taught, could not be bought. It simply existed in people or it did not. The room shifted again, quieter this time, not because of tension, but because something about the moment had changed its tone, the curiosity replaced with something closer to understanding, even if incomplete, and Linda lowered her gaze briefly, her earlier certainty gone, replaced with a silence that felt closer to reflection than confusion. Ava let out a slow breath, not heavy, not dramatic, just enough to steady herself, and she said that she had not done anything special, that she had only done what felt right, and for the first time, the man smiled a little more fully, not in amusement, but in agreement, as if that exact thought was what made it matter. He glanced once more toward the booth by the window, the place where everything had begun in its simplest form, and then back at her, saying that the world often overlooks what is quiet, what is small, what does not demand attention, but those are the things that define it more than anything else. And Ava felt that land differently than before, not as something distant, but as something she recognized in herself without having named it. Outside, the line of vehicles remained, still and patient, but their presence no longer felt imposing. It felt like a continuation, like something waiting to follow rather than lead. And inside, the diner slowly began to breathe again, conversations returning in low tones, movements resuming in careful steps, as if people were unsure how to return to normal. After witnessing something that did not fit into it, Ava looked down at the card one last time, then back at him, her grip steady now, not questioning, not hesitant, and in that quiet exchange, without any further words, something settled between them, something understood without needing to be spoken, that whatever came next would not be about the card, or the cars, or the attention, but about the same simple choice she had already made, the one that had brought everything to this moment, without her ever trying to make it happen. The moment did not end with applause or movement. It settled instead, quiet and steady, like something that had finally found where it belonged, and Ava felt it in the way her shoulders relaxed without her noticing, in the way the card no longer felt unfamiliar in her hand, but simply present, like it had always been meant to be there. The man studied her for a second longer, not evaluating, not testing, just observing with a kind of calm certainty that did not need to be proven, and then he shifted slightly, glancing toward the entrance where the line of suited figures remained still, waiting without impatience, as if time itself had slowed to match the rhythm of this moment. He said her name again, softer now, almost like a reminder rather than a call, and Ava met his gaze without hesitation, her expression unchanged, grounded in the same quiet confidence she had carried through every small choice that had led here. He told her that there was one more thing she should understand. Not about the card, not about the cars, but about him, and the room seemed to listen again, the background noise fading just enough to make space for what came next. He explained that he had not lost his way, not in the way people assumed, that he had stepped away deliberately, choosing to sit in places where no one recognized him, where titles and expectations held no weight, because there are things a person can only learn when they are no longer seen as important, and Ava felt that settle deeper than anything else he had said, because it matched something she had always known without having words for it. He said that in those quiet places, most people looked past him, some avoided him, a few offered help out of obligation, but almost none stayed, almost none chose to return, and his voice did not carry disappointment, only clarity, like he was stating something that had already been accepted. He paused, his eyes steady on hers, and then said that she had been the exception, not because she gave more than others, but because she did it without changing, without adjusting her behavior based on who he might be, and that was what mattered. Ava shifted her weight slightly, the floor beneath her steady, familiar, and she felt the truth of that without needing to defend it, without needing to explain herself, because it had never been about proving anything. Linda remained silent now, her earlier authority replaced with a quiet awareness that something far beyond her control had unfolded right in front of her, and even the customers who had once complained sat still, their expressions softened, as if they were seeing the room differently than before. The man took a small step back, not away from Ava, but into a position that allowed the space around them to breathe again, and he gestured lightly toward the booth by the window, saying that some places reveal people, not through grand moments, but through the smallest choices repeated over time, and Ava followed his glance for just a second, seeing the empty seat, the faint reflection of the neon light, the simple space where everything had begun, and it looked the same as it always had, yet completely different. When she looked back at him, nothing needed to be added, nothing needed to be clarified, and in that quiet understanding, the moment shifted once more, not toward an ending, but toward something else entirely, something that had not yet been spoken, but was already beginning to take shape in the stillness between them. The stillness stretched, not uncomfortable, not forced, just present, like a quiet space that allowed something honest to step forward without being interrupted, and Ava felt it in the way her breathing settled into a steady rhythm, in the way her grip on the card loosened just slightly, no longer holding it like an answer she needed to solve, but like something she already understood. The man watched her for a moment longer, then shifted his gaze toward the room, not to command attention, but to acknowledge it, to let the presence around him return to its natural shape, and the men near the walls adjusted almost imperceptibly, their posture easing, their focus no longer fixed on control but on observation. As if the purpose they had arrived with had already been fulfilled, Ava tilted her head just slightly, her voice calm, asking, "What would happen next?" Not out of expectation, but out of simple curiosity, and the question hung in the air for a moment before he answered, because it was not a question about logistics or plans, it was a question about meaning, about direction, about whether this moment would change anything at all. He said that most people expect moments like this to lead somewhere dramatic, somewhere obvious, but the truth is, the most important changes are often the ones that look the same from the outside, and Ava felt that settle in a way that surprised her, because it did not promise anything. It did not offer escape or transformation. It simply reflected what she had already lived. He stepped slightly to the side, his hand gesturing toward the counter, the menus, the simple space that had defined her days for so long, and he said that she could walk away from it if she chose, that the card would open doors she had never seen before, places far removed from this small diner and its quiet routines. But he paused before finishing the thought, giving her time to feel the weight of that possibility without pushing her toward it. Ava glanced around, not hurried, not overwhelmed, just aware, taking in the worn edges of the counter, the soft hum of the refrigerator behind her, the faint scent of coffee that lingered in the air, and she realized that nothing about it felt small to her, not in the way people often meant. It felt real, grounded, honest, and she looked back at him with the same steady gaze she had carried all along, saying that she did not help him because she wanted something different. She helped him because it felt right where she already was. The words did not echo, they did not demand attention, but they landed quietly and firmly, and something in his expression shifted, not surprise, not even approval, but recognition, deeper this time, as if she had answered a question he had not spoken out loud. He nodded once, slowly, and said that was exactly why this mattered, because the choice had not been influenced by what she might gain. It had come from who she already was, and that could not be replaced, could not be taught, could not be replicated by opportunity. Alone, Linda exhaled softly behind the counter, a sound that carried more reflection than relief, and a few customers exchanged glances that held less judgment now, more thought, as if they were reconsidering something they had overlooked before. The man took another small step back, allowing the space between them to widen just enough to signal that the moment was shifting again, not ending, but evolving. And he said that whatever she chose next, whether she stayed or left, whether she used the card or never touched it again, it would not change what had already been proven here, that the value of what she did had never depended on who was watching. And Ava felt that settle fully this time, not as a possibility, but as something complete, something that did not need to grow or change to matter. The diner seemed to breathe again around them, the quiet hum returning, the clink of cups, the soft murmur of voices, and yet the space between them held its clarity, its calm, as if the moment had placed something permanent into a place that would otherwise have forgotten it. And as Ava stood there, the card resting lightly in her hand, she understood that whatever came next would not define her. It would simply reveal more of what had already been there all along. The space between them softened, not fading, not disappearing, but settling into something quieter, something that no longer needed to hold tension to be meaningful. And Ava felt it in the way her shoulders eased, in the way the card rested naturally in her hand, as if it had found its place without needing explanation. The man studied her one last time, not as someone measuring a decision, but as someone recognizing it. And he gave a small nod that carried more weight than any formal gesture, as if he was acknowledging not just her words, but everything that had led to them. He turned slightly then, his attention shifting outward for the first time, and the men who had filled the room adjusted almost immediately, not in a rush, not with urgency, but with a quiet efficiency that suggested they understood without being told. And the atmosphere began to change again, not abruptly, but steadily, like a tide, pulling back after reaching its highest point. Linda exhaled slowly, her posture loosening as if she had been holding something she did not realize until it was gone. And she glanced at Ava, not with authority, not with instruction, but with something closer to respect, uncertain but genuine, as if she was seeing her for the first time beyond the role she had always assigned her. Ava remained where she was, her feet grounded, her presence steady, watching as the man took a step toward the door, his pace unhurried, his expression unchanged, and yet there was something different now, something that felt complete, as if whatever he had come to find had already been found. He paused at the threshold, just before the bell above the door could sound, and without turning fully, he spoke again, his voice calm, clear enough to reach her without effort, saying that the world does not always change in loud ways. Sometimes it shifts in places no one thinks to look, and the only people who notice are the ones who were part of it from the beginning. Ava did not respond right away, not because she had nothing to say, but because the moment did not ask for words. It asked for understanding, and she gave a small nod instead, the same quiet acknowledgement she had offered him before, the same one that had started everything without either of them realizing it. Outside, the line of vehicles waited in still formation, their presence no longer imposing but simply part of the scene, like something that belonged to him but did not define him. And as he stepped through the door, the bell chimed once, soft and clear, marking the transition without interrupting it. One by one, the men followed, their movements just as measured as when they arrived, their presence receding from the room without leaving disruption behind, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the diner began to return to itself, the low hum of conversation rising again, the clink of silverware, the steady rhythm of a place that had always continued no matter what passed through it. Ava stood for a moment longer, then slipped the card into her apron, not hidden, not displayed, just placed where it could remain part of her day, without changing it, and she reached for a coffee pot, refilling a cup at the counter with the same careful motion she had used countless times before. The difference was not in what she did, but in how the room saw it now, in the way a few customers watched her a second longer than they might have before, in the way Linda no longer corrected her pace or her choices, and in the quiet understanding that settled into the space, not spoken, not announced, but present all the same, that something important had happened here, not because of who walked in, but because of what had already been there all along. The diner settled back into its rhythm the way a heartbeat returns after a long pause, steady, familiar, almost unchanged, and yet Ava could feel the difference in the space around her, not loud, not overwhelming, but present in the small details, in the way the air seemed softer, in the way the silence between sounds no longer felt empty but full. She moved behind the counter with the same quiet precision, pouring coffee, wiping down the surface, her hands steady, her steps measured, but there was something new in the way people looked at her, not all of them, not completely, but enough to notice, enough to shift the weight of the room just slightly in her direction. Linda stood nearby, watching for a moment before speaking, her voice lower now, less certain, saying that she had never seen anything like that before, and Ava gave a small nod, not because she had an answer, but because the moment did not need one. It had already said what it needed to say. The booth by the window remained empty, the faint glow of the neon sign reflecting across its surface, the same flicker, the same quiet presence, and Ava found herself glancing at it as she passed, not out of habit, but out of recognition, like it had become something more than just a place to sit, something that held a memory without needing to hold a person. Outside, the parking lot was clear again, no trace of the vehicles except for the slight impression left in the gravel that would disappear with the next rain. And the world beyond the glass continued as it always had, cars passing, people moving, nothing stopping to acknowledge what had just taken place inside. Ava reached into her apron and touched the card once more, not to check it, not to confirm it was still there, but simply to feel it, to remind herself that it was real, and she left it there, not taking it out, not examining it again, because its meaning no longer depended on being seen. A customer at the counter cleared his throat softly, asking for a refill, and Ava turned toward him with the same calm expression, the same quiet attention, pouring the coffee just right, not too much, not too little, her movements unchanged, her presence steady, and the man gave a small nod of thanks, holding her gaze for a second longer than he might have before, as if he understood something he had not seen earlier. The hours passed in their usual rhythm, the light outside shifting from gray to gold as the sun broke through the clouds, casting long reflections across the diner floor. And Ava continued working, not differently, not with more urgency or less care, just as she always had, because nothing about who she was had needed to change. And as the day moved forward, the moment that had filled the room began to settle into memory, not fading, not disappearing, but becoming part of the place itself, woven into the quiet details that most people would never notice. And in the soft reflection of the window, in the faint hum of the neon light, in the steady rhythm of coffee being poured and plates being set down, there was something left behind, something that did not belong to power or wealth or recognition, but to something quieter, something lasting. The simple truth that she had never tried to change the world, she had only chosen to see one person when no one else did, and somehow that had been enough.